So I thought maybe to talk a bit about some of the ethical situations that have unfolded. A dilemma is something where there's not a right or a wrong answer, um, and what each business or individual decides can vary, and it depends on their values and the context. So, as you've noticed with social distancing, Toronto is much less active than it used to be, and this is causing certain problems about whether workers should be paid or laid off, goods that are in demand, price gouging, safety issues. And here's a comment by Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, about how he believes this will affect brands in the future for years to come.
Mark, you've tweeted, and I quote, "There is no date when it comes to the safety of our employees. Their safety always comes first." You, of course, do have many employees who work for you. You are the owner of a basketball team. You're involved in a number of other businesses as well. How do you think about this very question? When is it safe to send people back to work?
You know what? When you deal with imperfect information, you make imperfect decisions, and there's no reason to rush this. I'd rather err on the side of caution. I'm not going to, tell people to go to work when I'm uncertain. And not only is it a safety issue, it's a business issue. How companies respond to that very question is going to define their brand for decades. If you rushed in and somebody got sick, you were that company. If you didn't take care of your employees or stakeholders and put them first, you were that company. And particularly with the Gen Z and millennial generations, that's going to be unforgivable. So not only is it smart to take care of your employees, but it's also good business, and that's the way I'm looking at it.
So a couple of terms that Mark Cuban used there: imperfect information. We would say that for in economics, for competition to work, everyone needs to have all the information. They need perfect information. They need to know how much it costs to make, how much of it's available, who else wants it, what the substitutes are, what's going to happen in the future. We need to know as much as possible. And if we do, then the price and quantity will be fair to both the supplier and the consumer. But sometimes that's not the case. One side knows more than the other, or there are facts that are not known. So that's what he means by imperfect information. And I think the expression he used was imperfect information leads to imperfect decisions, which is something that can happen. And he also talked about the altruism of the millennial generation, and that's sometimes called cause-related marketing. You may or may not disagree, but the younger age group, under 25, many of them respond well to organizations that market themselves with a purpose, because they want to be part of something that's equal and inclusive, and part of something that is just bigger than a transaction for goods and services. So for marketing messages in altruistic marketing, they need to be inclusive, authentic, truthful, and purposeful. So if a company, is talking about the health of their workers, and then they make them come to work during the COVID-19 crisis, that may, not be truthful. And that is what he's talking about. So some issues, some ethical dilemmas that occurred as a result of COVID-19. And again, there's not necessarily an easy answer. It may be legal, but there still might be a right or a wrong thing to do. So there's been some instances of price gouging at Pusateri's. They were criticized for selling disinfecting wipes for $29.99 each. And that equate a markup, and it's pushed, because of the COVID-19 crisis. Here's how it would look on a supply and demand graph. Well, there's a big increase from D1 to D2 due to the severity of the crisis. And you can see at the supply graph, people are induced to supply more disinfectant wipes and other products, and then there may be a strong increase in price. So is this right or wrong? Some would say that it's the price the market will bear, that demand did increase a lot, and because of the laws of supply and demand to induce those suppliers to provide more Lysol wipes and make them available for sale, they should be encouraged to sell at whatever price they want. Others might say that it's taking advantage of selling a necessity in a crisis. People would not choose to buy that if there was not a legitimate reason, and so there might be laws to prevent price gouging, or you might hear politicians say that they'll go after those who were price gouging. You may have seen that some people on Amazon bought a bunch of wipes and other cleaning products and were selling them at a big markup, and they've since been banned from Amazon. So that's something you would have to decide. Is it fair to charge whatever the market would bear? Just allow whatever equilibrium happens on the supply and demand graph to happen? Or should there be some sort of limit? A reason to have some sort of limit would be the drug chloroquine that was touted by Donald Trump as a possible miracle drug. Well, it is used for malaria and it's used for lupus. And people who need it for their lupus conditions, which is far more common in North America than malaria, are unable to get it and unable to refill the prescriptions. So there's a shortage here. Is it appropriate? Like, should here to be how that shortage looks again. Demand goes up with drugs. There tends to be a regulation for how much it can be charged for it. So, but you can see that there's so many people want it. There's an inability to fill all of those demands at the current price. So that could be people without choosing between someone who has lupus or someone who has COVID-19. What is ethical? You could say, a pharmacist could say, okay, well, I believe COVID-19 is more urgent, so I want those patients to receive the medication. Or you could say whoever was getting it first could get it. Or we should involve the government to produce more so everyone can get it. Or it's not proven for COVID-19 yet, therefore it shouldn't be used until it's proven. These are all possibilities to resolve the ethical dilemma. And you hopefully this shows that with ethical dilemmas, there's often a cost. Someone in this case does not get the medication. So, workplace safety. So, construction sites are still running in Toronto. And you may have seen some workers expressing concerns about the proximity of the workers, about the lack of hand washing, about the lack of sanitary conditions. And so far, the government has said, yes, construction is essential, but construction sites should follow the same safety and health protocols as everyone else. But then you see a construction site in your neighborhood, or you see a construction site on the news. What exactly is right? Well, one way to deal with this ethical situation is to do a stakeholder analysis. So stakeholders are people affected by what's happening. So primary stakeholders are directly affected or directly affect the company and its profitability. This would be the owners of the company, the managers, the employees, the customers, people like that. They want the company to do well. They're primary stakeholders. However, any business that operates, there's secondary stakeholders. For Uber, if the primary stakeholders were the driver, the app company, and the rider, well, the secondary stakeholders would be taxi drivers who are hurt by the popularity of Uber, people on the street who might get into an accident with an Uber car. They're secondary stakeholders. So secondary stakeholders have an impact on the company, like the media or the government, but they do not influence its success, or they are impacted by the company, like neighbors, community members, but again, they don't have a financial connection to the company. So when we say stakeholder analysis, we try to figure out which stakeholder and their needs is most important. So in this construction issue, primary stakeholders would be the owners of the construction company, the workers. If they were building condos, it would be the condo owners, those who were expecting a condo finished by a certain day. If they're just paving a road, it might be the government who's contracted it and needs the road to be paved in a timely manner, or the Metrolix construction that needs to be finished in a timely manner. So they're primary stakeholders. They're affected by the company, and how well it does impacts them. But then there are other people who are secondary stakeholders, like in neighborhood businesses. I'm sure if you told the businesses at Yonge and Eglinton that there'd be another 6-month pause while everything was shut down due to COVID-19, they'd have some comments about that. Maybe the community members, who pass the construction site, who deal with the trucks, who deal with all the noise in the construction. The families of the construction workers, if they go home and they get sick, or if there's a huge outbreak at construction sites, that will then influence healthcare workers. So to figure out who's right and who's wrong in the issue of this construction safety issue, you would do a stakeholder analysis. Who's involved and whose needs are paramount? If you're, very market oriented, you might say the needs of business are most important. We got to keep business going. If you're more socially conscious, you might say the safety of the workers and the safety of their families and the safety of the healthcare system are more important. And that would be how you made your decision. Another issue is conflicts of interests. So one concern is some of the senators in the U.S. Senate received a classified briefing about the coronavirus and then sold their stocks in certain companies, certain travel companies, and purchased stock in companies that help you work at home. So they were in a position of conflict of interest. Was it right for them to sell their stocks? And a conflict of interest is when a person or an organization or a business has multiple interests, and those interests may compete with each other. That could be financial, personal, fiduciary. A fiduciary is just a duty of care. So the president of a company has a duty to make sure the company does as well as possible, but their compensation may be tied to stock prices, so they then have a financial interest in seeing the stock price go as high as possible, which this conflict may lead them to inflate the stock price at the expense of the long-term health of the company, so they get their bonus. That would be an example of that. And protecting one interest might harm another. So we could look at that with the senators. So they have a fiduciary interest to look after the health of the United States and the state that elected them, but then they also have their personal finances. So when they received this briefing, apparently at the same time, Trump was saying, oh, the coronavirus is a hoax. So these senators didn't go and warn anyone or say, hey, stay socially isolated, or get your protective equipment ordered. They went and called their broker. So as a government official, does that meet our expectation? And that's often why you might hear the term blind trust when they ask that government officials put their stock portfolio in a trust so that they no longer actively manage it while they're in government, because it creates these situations where someone's listening to the classified briefing, and rather than making decisions for the health of American citizens, they made decisions for the health of their stock market portfolio. So these are some ethical situations that could arise, and you would want to think of, is Mark Cuban right? When he said the brands that don't act appropriately right now will be hurting themselves for the next 10, 20, 30 years, would you agree or disagree? Would you say, no, that's not important to customers, he's wrong? Would you say, people don't remember that long, he's wrong for that reason? Or would you say, in this case, Mark Cuban's right? When people see companies aren't acting appropriately during this public health crisis, they'll remember it and it'll influence their buying decisions in the coming years.